back in the studio, we shot some interior scenes, mainly the caves and all the interior of the courthouse, and we had some good fun doing that, and it worked out fairly well.
We came back to Shepperton and we built the interior of the cave. It was one cave for, I mean, don't tell anybody this, but it was one cave for both of the caves. And we had got all the extras to follow Mrs. Moore down in Bangalore. And the native villagers there were very tall and thin and very dark-skinned and skinny. And when we came to pick up the continuity of extras coming up with Mrs. Moore, of course, every Indian that turned up was very well fed and very pale. So we actually had to make them all up, darken them all up and just choose the thinnest ones we could, because culturally they were poles apart. And then we had a similar sort of problem with as he's been carried out of the courthouse, because he's carried out of the courthouse in Shepperton and he appears on the steps in Bangalore. And so we had to double the people carrying him out in Shepperton. These sort of ridiculous logistical problems, which you probably don't notice because you're watching the action, were a problem. And the courthouse actually was a very good set, and we managed to track down a chap who had been a district magistrate at that period, who came along and advised us on the court procedure then. Because David Lean again wanted accuracy. He didn't want to do a documentary, but he wanted accuracy.
This is no way to defend your case.
I'm not defending a case. And you are not trying one. We are both slaves.
Mr. Mahmood Ali, unless you sit down, I shall have to exercise my authority.
Do so. This trial is a farce.
Coming back to Shepperton was fantastic. It was the end of it all. You know, you'd had India, you came back, you had the experience. It was the film was finishing, and then, you know, that was it really. There was the rat party, and then everybody disappeared, and then you bump into David sort of at Pinewood where he was editing it, and that was probably the happiest I ever saw him. You know, him with his white glove, editing, enjoying it.
From a producer's point of view, there was no question that the man who directed it and wasn't probably the best editor Britain's ever produced. There was no question about him not having the right to edit his own film. He was just very good at manipulating these now antiquated machines. You know, the span of his time, starting in silent films and coming right up to the films that he made, he really did know everything about editing.
David was very sweet and generous in inviting me to Pinewood Studios quite often to watch the editing process. So for me to see David Lean with the white gloves on in the cutting room, you don't see that anymore. And that was wonderful to watch it all, and he'd show me how he cut from one scene to another.
I think that was his biggest regret, that he never got Best Editor for this film. I think that was his regret. Of all the Oscars it got, everything that it got, it never gave him what he wanted, which was just the best editor. And I think he was. I think he was in the way he put films together, stories together, and also the way he lived his life, you know, in a very editorial kind of way. I'm working with you now I'm moving on.
I remember being invited to see a rough cut at Pinewood, and I had never seen a rough cut before. So actually, it had strange music on, and, you know, it wasn't graded properly, and the film, the colour was... So I just remember the sweeping vistas and the enormity of the whole thing. But not impressed exactly with, because it was far from finished, so I've never been to a rough cut since.
As a producer, you sort of get married to the project, and you sort of know everything about it by the time you see it. Nothing really surprised me. I think Maurice Shah's music made an enormous difference. It really was very, very grand and sweeping and good. I liked it a lot.
I remember at the screening, David pinpointing me and saying, "Well, dear boy, what have you got to say?" Being a fellow director. And I thought it was. I thought he had managed to overcome the problems of the book extremely well. It was a very brave attempt at it, I think. I mean, an almost unfilmable book. I think he made a really good stab at it.
The Forster novel, I thought, was not as big a story as the sorts of stories that he'd been used to with Zhivago, with Lawrence, with River Kwai, although I suppose he took it onto a big canvas. So the story wasn't that enormous, but with the canvas of India, he felt that he could lift it and put it on and paint it with a big broad brush, and that's what he did, you know. So the film stands as a lovely Forster story, but put on this enormous canvas of India, which worked very well.
When the Oscar nominations, Amadeus was the other big competition, I think, and I was incredibly pleased, actually, the nominations it got, because it sort of validated David Lean as a great British director and his ability to select a crew and a cast that could tell a good story that people wanted to see and people rated. And actually that was terrific. And, you know, I'm really sorry he didn't make another film, really, because it would have been interesting.
I would say there wasn't a sense that it was going to be his last film. I mean, he seemed strong and, you know, and powerful and absolutely in control. I think when you're doing a film, whatever size of the venture, you're so involved in just what it is on the day that it is that you don't think in terms of posterity. I can't believe it's 20 years ago, but it does now seem historic, you know, it's in history for me now. And it's just something that will always be up there in a sort of frame as something, an adventure that you don't have again. It was wonderful.
Oh, I tell you, it was an honour to do, and looking back, it's an honour to have been in. And I met this wonderful man who then became a very, very close friend, and I saw a great deal of him, and then he was going to do Nostromo. So I was down in south of France being flown out by him because he wanted me to play Gould. So there I was round that table with John Box and all the guys and talking about the film, and I was, you know, there we were. Maybe that might have happened. You never know. God didn't allow him to make that last picture, but I made a great friend, and I really, really enjoyed myself. I was very lucky. It was, for me, you know, the biggest film I'd ever been in, and still is the biggest film I've ever been in. It was just a great life-enhancing experience to be part of that, and to get to India, to get to the subcontinent, and to travel about in India was a very, very memorable experience in my career. It was a beautiful film, and I thought he had done a wonderful job, one of his best works, I think.
Yeah, I think people liked the film. I mean, I think it would have done better if it had been better distributed globally at the time. I mean, if it had come out now, it would have done miles better. But I think it was a remarkably good film at the end of an era for good British films. I think since then it's been a bit of a downhill struggle. I mean, I'm not saying because there aren't any more David Leans, there's some fine directors out there, but the grandeur and the scope of the subject has disappeared since 20 years ago.
It sits as the most exciting filming experience I think that I ever have had and probably ever will have. And I don't think that any productions like that are going to happen again, because it happened at a time when things had to be done for real. And nowadays, a lot of the things which we did then would not be done now, and it would be thanks to people sitting at computer screens.
The passage to India were of a storytelling and a filmmaking of a different time. I think it sits in the old school of filmmaking. It sits in that wonderful kind of spirit of, you know, where you did go into a dark room and it was quiet and the film started and this thing just absorbed you. Absolutely brilliant.